How do I reach levels 4 and 5?
To get into levels 4 or 5, the most important thing to do is to stay focused on the question. So everything you write, your contexts, your analysis, your comparisons, they should all be relevant to the question. The key word in the mark scheme for level 5 is evaluation. And evaluation doesn't mean saying whether one text is better than the other or more successful. What it means is considering the different meanings that the text might have. So thinking about different interpretations, not seeing the text as a fixed thing with only one meaning. We are going to now have a little look at a stronger essay. This was on the level 4-5 borderline. It's very good at making connections between the texts and on the contexts. This is a question 8 response looking at how the writers use a range of locations. It's answering on Frankenstein and The Handmaid's Tale.
Both authors, Atwood and Shelley, use locations by attributing symbolic meaning to them, which epitomises the greater overriding themes of their respective novels. Not only do both authors use locations to symbolise the transgression of moral and social boundaries, but also as places of hope, coding the locations of the two novels as just as complex as the characters who inhabit them.
This introduction is really good because it establishes a clear argument. With quite a general question like this one, the temptation is to give a list of locations, but not really to connect them or to say very much about how the writer is using the locations. This student's clearly signalled that they're going to look at the symbolic meanings of the locations and that the locations are used by the writers to explore particular themes, the transgression of boundaries and the use of hope. They've also clearly started out with comparisons in mind. They've said they're going to compare symbolic meanings and themes in the novels. Let's hear more from this student's response.
Arguably, the most significant use of locations by both authors are as symbols of transgression. This is evident in The Handmaid's Tale, not only when Offred captures the commander invading her room, with such a lexical choice clearly holding connotations of subversive activity, but also in the commander's office, which is an oasis of the forbidden. As the polysyndactic listing of books and books and books in the office emphasises, the extent of the commander's power in Gilead, the office itself, becomes symbolic of his position of significance in the regime.
The student's first paragraph starts to analyse The Handmaid's Tale in close detail. Notice the way they've used several short quotes to develop their idea about the locations the commander visits being transgressive. What's great about this part of the essay is the way the quotes are analysed in detail. The start of the paragraph is also starting to take an evaluative approach. That first sentence is phrased, arguably the most significant locations are symbols of transgression. And that word arguably shows that the student is thinking about the different possibilities and that they're going to consider other possible interpretations as they continue. Let's look at what they said about Frankenstein.
In Frankenstein, Shelley uses locations to represent the act of transgression. However, unlike Atwood, who used a location that was at the centre of Gilead, Shelley uses remote locations to show transgression. Victor confesses that neither the structure of languages, nor the codes of government, nor the politics of various states appeal to him, reflecting his choice of location in the subversive act of creating the creature as his rejection of societal concepts reflects his transgression of societal boundaries. For example, he chooses to construct the second creature in some remote part of Scotland, which in his isolation allows him to transgress societal restrictions. Shelley may have used this to evoke fears and anxieties of the zeitgeist surrounding revolution, as the mob population of Paris was crucial in overthrowing the establishment in 1789, and there were growing fears that the loss of self involved in participating in a mob would lead to the loss of morals that would usually apply to an individual. Therefore, Victor, in his travelling to a remote place, loses his own self and morals in the same way that revolutionaries of the era did.
In this paragraph, the student has made quite a detailed comparison between the texts, starting with a similarity in the symbolism of the locations, but then teasing out a difference in the types of locations each writer uses. We then get some detailed analysis of Frankenstein. Again, the analysis of the writer's craft is very good, But even better here is the way that the historical context of the French Revolution is brought in. This is a great example of how contextual points can be made relevant to the specific question. The way that the isolated location is linked to the loss of self and the loss of morality that was also evident in the French mobs, it's really well explained here. The student goes on to advance their point.
However, Atwood and Shelley use locations differently as far as the homes of the protagonists are concerned. Shelley categorises Victor's home of Geneva as one of violence, as the location was, for the Romantics especially, the home of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, whose writings contributed to the French Revolution, and therefore by locating William's murder at Plainpalais, near to Geneva, Shelley clearly equates the monster's actions to revolutionary bloodshed. On the other hand, Atwood codes Offred's home, at least in Gilead, as a place of peace in the night sections of the novel, where she is free to lie in her room. While being confined to her room, Atwood's analepsis shows the comfort that Offred takes from her reflection as the hypophora of "where should I go, somewhere good," highlights how she is free to explore her better memories and interior thoughts in the safety of her room. Given the use of the Sufi epigraph, Atwood may have been using such sections to draw parallels to Sufi mysticism, which focused more on interiority and private mystical union with God, rather than any prescribed theological responses to Islam. This draws parallels to Offred, as her personal spirituality is centred around the cushion which says faith in her room, rather than the religion forced on her by Gilead.
This is a paragraph from later on in the essay, and it's used to help the student move on. Having focused previously on a similarity between the novels and taken a largely thematic approach, in this paragraph we focus on two locations and the different uses the writers make of them, comparing the violence of one to the safety of the other. Again, there's lots of detailed analysis of each text and some relevant contextual discussion of religion for The Handmaid's Tale and Rousseau and the bloodshed of the French Revolution for Frankenstein. It's a long and detailed paragraph that covers all of the assessment objectives as it develops. Now, towards the end of this paragraph, the student uses a lot of literary terms that they don't really develop. So, for example, they talk about analepsis, which is flashback. They name it, but they don't really link it to the point they're making. They talk about hypophora, which is asking a question then immediately answering it. And they don't really say how that technique helps to create the meanings in Atwood's novel. So this is one area they could have developed to get their answer more securely into level 5. Now, we're not looking at the whole of the essay here, but in the whole response this happened quite a lot, which meant that they got level 4 for AOs 1 and 2, even though they were very, very strong in level 5 for AOs 3 and 4.